Hello and welcome to the Dominaria United limited set review for Black. We previously went over the white, multicolored, and blue cards in other episodes that I will link to a playlist for. I'm putting together 2 episodes a day to go over the Dominaria United limited set review and prepare you for the release on MTG Arena and also pre-releases. So if you haven't seen the white one yet, I recommend viewing that one first, as in that episode I go over my methodology for grading. But otherwise, stick around here for black, and let's dive in. So up first we have Battlefly Swarm. It's 1 black for a 1/1 Phyrexian insect creature with flying. Pay 1 black, Battlefly Swarm gains Death Touch until end of turn. I don't mind a 1/1 flyer with Death Touch for 1, but it doesn't do enough to be a card, and it does not get bigger when drawn late, which we've seen in these other, or several of these other 1-drop creatures. So this is just going to get set aside as filler. I'm going to give this one a D+. Up next we have Bone Splinters. It's a reprint. 1 black mana for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, destroy target creature. It's super cheap, and it seems like there's a lot of creatures to sack, so I think this will be a decent card in this set. It is a big drawback that you have to sacrifice a creature, so you're paying kind of 2 cards to eliminate 1, but it is super cheap. I do think this will be playable. I think it's on the lower side of that. I will give this a C-. Up next, we have Erborg Repossession. For 1 black mana, it's a sorcery with kicker 1 to green. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. You gain 2 life. If this spell was kicked, return another target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is not great early because you do not have creatures yet in your graveyard most likely, but you can get your best creature back, gain 2 life, and then also kick this if you're playing green-black for 3 to get your best permanent back in addition to it. So this is kind of like a Raise Dead that also has the divination type effect with your graveyard, and that's a pretty good card. I'm going to give this a C. I think it's a solid playable. Up next we have Battle Rage Blessing. For 1 and a black, it's an instant. Target creature gains Death Touch and indestructible until end of turn. So this is flexible. It allows you to kill something, protect something, but it needs some setup to get that all to work. Although interesting, if a double block happens, you know, you attack, they double block, you put this on it, you get Death Touch, and you can hopefully kill a couple things if you have more than 1 power. But 2 mana for a trick with setup is a bit of a cost, and I would just relegate this to filler, so I'm going to give this a D+. Up next, we have Phyrexian Vivisector. For 1 and a black, you get a 2/2 Phyrexian human creature. Whenever a creature you control dies, scry 1. Alright, so solid rate, a 2/2 for 2. We are looking for better than that. It is better in that it allows you to scry through your deck. So I think this is a solid card. I would still say this is on the lower end of playables. I would give this a C-. Up next is Splatter Goblin. It's a 1 and a black for a 2/1 Phyrexian Goblin creature. When Splatter Goblin dies, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Okay, so 2/1 for 2 mana, not a great rate, but I'm okay with it having 2 power. Especially when it dies, it can pick off something else potentially. I like that a little more than the last card. I think this is a solid rate for a creature, and I'm going to give this a solid C. I'll be playing a good amount of these. Up next is Toxic Abomination. For 1 and a black, it's a 3/2 Phyrexian zombie creature. When Toxic Abomination enters the battlefield, you lose 2 life. Alright, so this is kind of the Crooked Custodian from Streets of New Capenna of the set, which was, I think, my 2nd most drafted common overall for that set. So I'll be drafting a lot of these. I will say, while that bodes well for this creature, the drawback is worse than Crooked Custodian of just coming into play tapped. Losing 2 life is a bit worse in that later in the game, when there's a board stall and you're playing this, you still get the downside, whereas with the creature coming into play tapped, it wasn't as much of a downside for Crooked Custodian. So with that, I can't give it a C+ like I would Crooked Custodian, but I'll give this a C. Up next is Tribute to Erborg. For 1 and a black, you get an instant. It has Kicker, 1 and a blue. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. If this spell was kicked, that creature gets an additional -1/-1 until end of turn for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. Alright, so Shock is good because it costs 1. This costs 2, so it's a little bit pricey. But it can kill bigger creatures later on. It requires a little bit of setup. So I think it's playable. I would be in the C to C- range on this. I'm going to go with a C- because this costs 2 for this. But it's playable. Up next, we have Aggressive Sabotage. For 2 and a black sorcery with Kicker red, target player discards 2 cards. If this spell was kicked, it deals 3 damage to that player. So these pay 3, discard 2 are almost always like a filler D range. They're bad when you draw it late because your opponent isn't holding on to cards that they need. They may be holding on to some lands. They're usually getting a card and playing it right away. So later in the game, this becomes less useful. Now, they added the kicker bonus of dealing 3 damage to that player. And in black-red, you want to go aggressive and usually get them down to low life, and this might be a finisher in those cases. So I think this is better than the typical case of this card, but I'm still going to relegate it to filler. I'll just call it good filler, so D+ it is. Up next, we have Eerie Soul Tender, 2 and a black for a 3/1 Spirit Cleric. When Eerie Soul Tender enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. Pay 4 and a black, exile Eerie Soul Tender from your graveyard, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This is a bad rate, right? 3 and 1 for 3. You're looking more like getting 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. Alright, if you want to be milling, that makes sense. We haven't seen a whole lot of payoffs for that, but there's some graveyard recursion and things like that here. My problem with this card is how expensive it is to do the other ability of 4 and a black, just to return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and then you also need to play that creature thereafter. So, I give this a low rate. I think I'm just going to give this a D. Admittedly, when I gave it a D, I was thinking you were just returning this creature card from graveyard to your hand. So reassessing this as any creature, it's definitely better. I don't think it's that much better. It's still really expensive to do. I would maybe give this a D+ with that. We'll see. I'll probably play this as filler at some point in my deck, and maybe I'll come up on it, but I'm not going to go higher than a D+ for now. Alright. Up next is Gibbering Barricade. For 2 and a black, you get a 2/4 Nightmare Wall creature with Defender. Pay 2 and a black, sacrifice a creature, you gain 1 life, and draw a card. Alright, so finally we get a Defender that I think is playable. It's nice that there's a sack outlet that also gets you to draw cards. And while I still don't love Defender, I think this one's playable mostly because of the ability combined with the stats look pretty good. 3 mana for a 2/4 is decent stats to begin with, and I like that ability. It's a little expensive, but I think this is what you'll want to be doing in a lot of your black decks. So I still don't think this is just a solid playable of a C. I'll give it a C- though. Up next is Phyrexian Rager. For 2 and a black, a 2/2 Phyrexian horror creature. When Phyrexian Rager enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So this is also a reprint. This is a good one. I will take 3 mana for a 2/2 draw a card any day. I give this a C+. It doesn't pull me into black, but anytime I'm in black, I'm happy to play many copies of these. C+ it is. Shadow Prophecy. 2 and a black for an instant with Domain. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put up to 2 of them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. You lose 2 life. Alright, so this is the Black's take on Divination. We've said divination is typically a D. In my eyes, this really has downside. You lose 2 life doing it. I don't like that downside. Yes, sometimes you can look at more cards with the domain. I don't think that's a huge upside here. I'm just going to rate this a D. Again, if you need some card draw, these are fine to put in your deck, but I'm looking to get it elsewhere. D it is. Alright, up next we have Extinguish the Light. 2 black for an instant. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. If its mana value was 3 or less, you gain 3 life. Alright, so I am a sucker for removal. I like removal, but I don't like removal when you are trading down in mana. This is 4 mana removal to kill something that is 3 mana value or less. You do get the trade-off if you gain 3 life, which is definitely nice, but I don't like trading down on mana. I'm going to call this just good filler. This will be a D+. You really want to get your removal elsewhere. Alright, we have Phyrexian Warhorse, 3 and a black for a 3/3 Phyrexian Horse creature with kicker white. When Phyrexian Workhorse enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. You can pay 1 and sacrifice another creature to give Phyrexian Warhorse +2/+1 until end of turn. I'm really looking to get better. For 4 mana, you get a 3/3 that has this sacrifice a creature, get +2/+1 for a turn. Sacrificing a creature, usually I want something more permanent for doing that, like drawing a card. I'm only really looking to play this in black-white. It does get better to just pay 1 to get an additional 1/1 on top of it out of 1 card. But again, that rate of paying 5 for a 3/3 and a 1/1 is fine. So with all that, I think it's playable. I think it's on the lower end of playable. I'm giving it a C-. Up next, we have Tattered Apparition. For 3 and a black, you get a 2/2 shade creature with flying. Pay 1 to black, Tattered Apparition gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Having to pay 4 mana to get a 2/2 flyer that you then have to sink 2 mana in just to give it +1/+1 is a low rate. This is filler. It's not unplayable. You only want to play it if you desperately need a flyer. Will I at some point die to this card? I'm sure I will, with people pumping it up 2 to 3 times and flying over me. But I'm looking to get better cards at a better rate than this. I'm going to just go ahead and give this a D-. I don't want to be sinking my mana into not playing new cards in the future. It's nice to have a mana sink, I guess, but D- it is. I was debating D, but I think this is bad enough where we can just go ahead and call it a D-. Up next, we have Writhing Necromass. For 6 and a black, you get a 5/5 zombie giant creature. This spell casts 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. It has Death Touch. So we've seen this series of cards that cost 7, that's a big power toughness creature with some small ability within all the different colors. I like the black one the most out of the ones I've seen so far, partially because in Limited, creatures are very common, so you'll have more creature cards in your graveyard, making this cost less more often. And I also like that it has Death Touch. So as a big bulky creature, they can either use removal on it, or more often they'll need to double block it. And because this has Death Touch, if they double or triple block this, you're going to be killing all the creatures that they do that with. So I like this a bit more. I still don't love it. I still think it's on the lower side of playable, but I will give this one a C-. Alright, moving on to the uncommons. We have Cult Conscript. It costs 1 black for a 2/1 skeleton warrior creature. It has Cult Conscript enters the battlefield tapped. Pay 1 and a black, return Cult Conscript from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only if a non-skeleton creature died under your control this turn. So this is a great rate, having a 2/1 for 1. It needs to have some downside, like coming into the battlefield tapped, but the fact that it can also regenerate itself to pay 1 and a black and put it back onto the battlefield from your graveyard is a big bonus. yes, it does require some setup. You need a non-skeleton creature to die under your control this turn, but this turn can be on your turn, on your opponent's turn. Basically, you'll have plenty of opportunities to pull this back up from your graveyard. So I like this card a lot. I don't think that this pulls me into black. It just doesn't do enough for that, but I still think this is a very good card. I will give this a C+. All right, Cut Down. Pay 1 black for an instant. Destroy target creature with total power and toughness 5 or less. So this is extremely efficient. It definitely has the limitation of having the power and toughness equal to 5. It can't kill big creatures, but you're going to have plenty of targets where the creature's power and toughness is 5 or less. So with that, this is really efficient and targets a lot of things, and you're always, again, trading up in mana in this case. So I like this card a lot. I'm going to give this one a B-. It pulls me into black. Its downside is what keeps me from giving this a B or better. But it's definitely pulls me into black. B- it is. I might see myself even come up to that on a B, potentially, depending on how it plays out. Blight Pile. 1 and a black for a 3/3 Phyrexian creature with Defender. Pay 2 and a black, tap each opponent X, or loses X life, where X is the number of creatures with Defender you control. Alright, so we do have this theme of, like, catch-em-all, Defender. I really think this Defender thing is probably along the lines of those fun ways that people in Limited can try to build a fun deck, see if they can make it work. That's kind of aligned with Mill, but more of, like, I don't know, these catch-em-all, Sanctum type of win conditions we've seen in the past. Who knows? Maybe Defender really is a thing. I haven't seen enough support for it yet. But, you know, maybe we'll try to make this come together at some point during the life cycle of this set in a draft. I'm still going to call it filler. I think this one's a D+, because it is a good rate of 3/3 for 2, but I don't like it when they have Defender. The ability is a decent addition, but not powerful enough for me to give it anything better than filler. D+ it is. Up next, we have Knight of Dusk's Shadow. For 1 and a black, you get a 2/2 human knight creature with Menace. Your opponents can't gain life. Pay 1 and a black, Knight of Dusk's Shadow gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Alright, so this is the shadow side of the Knight of Dusk's Light, I think we saw in white. I think I gave that card a B. It was a really good creature. That one had first strike. Menace on a pumping creature is not as good, in my opinion, as a first strike. So I don't think this card is as good. But I will give this one a solid C+. It's a really good card. Just doesn't pull me into black. Alright, up next we have Pilfer. For 1 and a black, it's a sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. So I'm not historically a fan of these search their hand and pick off a card type of abilities for 2. For 2, it's a little bit expensive, especially since they have not spent the mana to cast that card, slowing them down, and then you have removal for it, right? So I'd rather have removal than picking it from their hand. That said, it is a decent card, and it's a 2-drop if you need one. I think this effect is much better constructed, by the way, where you need to be picking off major threats in Limited. You don't have as big of a threats to pick off. So I really don't think this is any better than filler in Limited, but it's a decent filler. I'll be playing this some of the time when I need to. I'm going to give this a D+. Up next, we have Balduvian Atrocity. For 2 and a black, you get a 2/3 Phyrexian Berserker creature with Kicker Red. It has Menace. When Balduvian Atrocity enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Alright, so vanilla, you get 2/3 Menace creature for 3. That's a fine rate. I like it decently. This definitely comes up when you can kick it. But when you kick it, you are getting a creature on the battlefield for 1 more turn. Hopefully you can do something with that, like use it and sack it or something. But that's not enough to really draw me into this card a whole lot. I'm just going to give this card a solid C. I think it's a good playable, but it doesn't impress me. Up next, we have Braid's Frightful Return. For 2 and a black, it's a saga with read ahead. You may sacrifice a creature. If you do, each opponent discards a card. Chapter 2, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Chapter 3, target opponent may sacrifice a non-land, non-token permanent. If they don't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. Alright, so this is an interesting rendition of the pay 3, either opponent discards 2 or loses 2 or something, or you gain 2 cards type of divination type effect. And as you know, I'm not a big fan of those divination type effects, so typically divination gets a D+. This is better than that because you have a lot of different options here. I'm going to go ahead and give this one a C-. I think it's on the lower end of playables. Up next, we have Choking Miasma. For 1 black, you have a sorcery with kicker green. If this spell was kicked, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. I don't usually like board wipes that also affect your own creatures. There are a lot of 1/1s floating around in this set, and this will wipe those. But sometimes you want those 1/1s in your black deck. I think you'll really want this in blue-green when you can put a +1/+1 counter on something to save it from dying on your side, and then wipe the board. I'm going to call this a C for now, but I won't be surprised if I come up on it later. Up next, we have Monstrous War Leech. For 3 and black, it's a star leech horror creature with kicker blue. As Monstrous War Leech enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, mill 4 cards. Monstrous War Leech's power and toughness are each equal to the highest mana value among cards in your graveyard. So this one's often a good rate, but I'd rather it be more reliable. And for 4 mana, I'd like to do more than just have it be a beefy creature. But it is a playable, and it will often be, you know, a 4/4 for 4 or better. So I'm just going to give this one a C-. Up next, we have Sheoldred's Restoration. For 3 and a black, it's a sorcery with kicker 2 and white. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was kicked, you gain life equal to that card's mana value. Otherwise, you lose that much life. Exile Sheoldred's Restoration. So I really do like 4 mana, take a creature from your graveyard, put it onto the battlefield. It's better than raising it to your hand because you just, obviously, you get to immediately play it. You can even trade up on this and get a bigger creature than 4 mana onto the battlefield, which is great. The problem is, as you do what you want to do and get a big creature on the battlefield with all expensive mana cost, you're going to lose that much life unless you pay 2 and a white more, and that's a pretty big kicker. Now you're talking 7 mana to do all that. It's nice that it has the option to do either, and I do think this is a playable, but I think this is on the lower end of the playables. I'm going to give this a C-. And lastly, we have Sengir Connoisseur. For 3 black, you get a 3/3 vampire creature with flying. Whenever 1 or more other creatures dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Sengir Connoisseur. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this is pretty easy to activate and get to a good rate. 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer isn't great, but it's not horrible. On the same turn, if you play this pre-combat and then attack and they kill one of your creatures, or it doesn't even have to be your creatures, you could kill one of theirs, you get a +1/+1 counter on that this turn, and now it's already a great rate. On their turn, the same thing can happen. You can get a +1/+1 counter on their turn, and now, before it's even your next turn, you have a 5/5 flyer for 5, and it just keeps on going from there. This can snowball pretty quickly. Triggers will happen on this often, and even within black, you have a lot of sacrifice where you'd want to sacrifice something on, you know, either your turn or your opponent's turn to make sure you get at least 1 trigger a turn and really grow this fast. Because of all that, I like this card a lot. I do think this is a pull into black. I think this is a solid B. And that's all the uncommons in black. and commons for that matter. So thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. Up next, we have Red. And until next time, thanks. Bye.